So next fly I'm going to tie is the Viva Boobie. It is extremely effective, but it's one of those ones that you have to be careful using a boobie, and I always recommend to people, don't fish them slow. If you're going to use them, make sure that you're using them with a good sort of ethics, in the sense that fish can swallow them, and it's mainly because of the design with the eyes on them. When they do that take that I talk about, drawing the fly into the mouth, these go in far. They'll go right back to the gill rakers in a split second.
Called it the Viva Boobie?
It's called the Viva.
Viva.
V-I-V-A. That's okay. So this pattern, you can tie it on a range of hooks. Hook I'm going to use again today is size 10 Hannock, the H230. One thing I really like about these hooks, I don't know if you can see clearly in the photo, but it actually has the point actually curls upwards. These are a really effective fish holder. If you hook a fish on this, you're not going to lose it unless it's not set well into the lip itself. They don't tend to shake this one. Again, being a competition hook, it's designed and manufactured as a barbless hook, rather than being a hook that has a barb in its design flattened down. These are designed to have to hold on better. And again, if you've never seen them or you never ordered them, the Hannocks, certain sizes are better. I mean, if you're going to actually order some from the UK, or not from the UK, from Europe, they're from the Czech Republic, just send me an email. I can tell you which sizes I recommend for whatever kind of pattern you're going to tie. There is a local supplier in North America, Robinson Outdoors, Robinsons. They're in Victoria. A guy there named Andy Larkin actually works there. He's been bringing them in, so they are available if you want to buy them in North America without paying all the postage.
I'm not trying to plug anything here, but if anybody's interested, I can get them here now.
Or are you distributing?
Yeah.
Oh, good for you. Oh, that's good to know. So again, that's Jason Doucette. If you guys don't know who Jason is, you can talk to him afterwards. But again, they're a hook I strongly recommend. And to be honest, in the case of myself, as a competitive angler, those are the only hooks that I tie on for the majority of my competition hooks. So this pattern here, again, having the boobie eyes on the front of it, I want to start out with a real solid base on this. This is that size 10 hook again. And I'm just going to wrap the thread front to back on this, take it down to the bend, and then bring it all the way back up. Maybe about a 1/16 of an inch behind the eye, and just trim off the excess thread. Now the boobie eyes, there's a lot of different ways that you can buy them. They sell them pre-made. Rainey's Flies actually carries these, and they sell them in a range of colors and sizes. These are the ones that Rainey makes. I don't know if you guys have dealt with them, but if you don't want to spend the time to trim them down and make them, these ones aren't too bad. In my mind, to be quite honest, the foam is a bit too dense. I like to have the foam that I use is more of a squishy one, so if a fish does actually bite down on it, it actually feels a bit more natural. So I do like them a bit softer than what Rainey makes them. They do make the bigger size again. Medium is probably the more common size that you're going to want to use if you're going to actually buy them from Rainey. The small will work, but it's not quite as effective. Another source of them locally is Superfly actually makes these. And they call it a boobie eye foam, or body too. It says boobie eye, I think, / body foam. If you're going to buy this, medium is the size that you want. The small is too small. The large is a bit too large, but medium will work. The one from the UK that I use, the most common one, is this here. It's made by Vineyards. They call it Boobie Eyes Small. If you're actually going to take the time to order it from the UK at all, if you're interested, the size you want is small. When you do buy it from the UK, it doesn't come pre-cut like I have in here. It actually comes like this.
Guys, sometimes Superfly doesn't have that.
Pardon me?
Superfly doesn't have that anymore.
Oh, they're not carrying it anymore?
Well, it's still listed in their catalog.
Okay. Yeah, you might find it on the shelves because I don't think a lot of guys buy it. But again, when you buy it, it typically will look like this. It's a long cylinder.
Like a foam post then, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, you could use other foam sources if you have other types of foam. One foam you want to stay away from is like this one here. They sell, like Rainy sells one called float foam, but again, it's just like a rubber. Like it's too stiff. It can work on bigger patterns, but for this size here, it's more effective to have a softer one. So the idea with it is you take those tubes. And what I'll do is I'll sit down at night and I'll actually sit there and pre-cut them to the length that I want them. And again, one of these is going to make 2 eyes. You'll see in a minute here how you do it. But basically I cut them to the length, and then I take the scissors, which I'll show you here, and I actually round them off so that they'll have the proper shape for the pattern. So again, if you can't find the ones through Superfly, you can always try to order them from the UK if you're that bold to actually order. So I'm just going to take the Superfly one out, just being that that's probably the one that you guys would get if you're going to actually buy or source them locally. So the idea with this is you're just going to take the very end. When they make these, the ends of them look kind of ugly. See those little imprints on them, the way that they cut them or melt them? So I want to take the ends and I'm just going to trim them flush. Make sure it's like a nice 90-degree angle to itself. I'm going to move the hook sideways here just so you can see. So when I make the booby eyes on the pattern itself, you don't want to have a lot overhanging. You just basically want to have maybe a little less than a 1/4 inch on each side. So I'm just going to hold it there to get a sense of how big I want it. And about there is probably right. Almost cutting this in half is about the right length. So again, so after I've cut it, you can see here it just looks like a tube with square ends. So what you have to do is to take it in your fingers and just with a sharp pair of scissors just roll it as you're squeezing down and cutting it. But you see it'll make it a little more rounded on the edge. To pre-buy booby eyes, actually, to be honest with you, is very pricey through Rainy. They're not cheap. Whereas if you buy these cylinders and just sit down and be a little ADT and just watch TV with your wife and trim them and make a mess all over the floor, it's a lot cheaper. So again, so I'm just going to spin it and just cut down as I spin it. I mean, and it doesn't have to be an exact, beautiful, perfect shape to the eyes. I mean, I think as fly tyers we get a bit caught up or maybe a bit anal on it, that we want to have everything just perfect. So just get it to the point where you're happy. And as you can see here, it just sort of has a rounded edge look now. This pattern, I'm going to try and tie it facing towards you so you can actually see better what I'm doing. But I'm going to take my thread and I'm going to actually bring it back a little bit, about maybe 1/8 of an inch back, and I'm going to bring it over top of the booby foam, pull down, and actually I got pretty lucky there. It's almost proportional. You want to have it so that your thread is like dead center on this so that it won't actually look lopsided. So again, so bring it down and find out to what point you're happy. If you're not happy, just bring it up, bring it over again, and then bring it down. So that's pretty good there. So what I'll do is just give it 2 more wraps that way. I'm going to bring the thread behind the eye, or behind the booby eyes. And actually it's very hard for me to tie, so I'm going to actually spin it this way so I can do it the way I'm used to. So now I'm going to bring it over and bring it under. You're almost going to make like a figure 8 of this as you lock this on here. So again, so just making sure that you go over several times, and you can go around and then again several times that way. You don't want to pull down too hard or your thread will actually cut through the foam. So again, you just need some nice securing wraps. And once you have it on to the point you're happy, put a half hitch in front of the eye and kind of suck it underneath it. So it's going to help to lock that down 100%. Then once you have your half hitch, bring your thread underneath the eyes along the shank and bring it up behind. Now these are locked in here. They're not going to spin or twist on me. But if you don't spend the time to do enough figure of 8s and lock it down, it will eventually twist as you use them. So, yes.
Where you could use your crazy glue.
Exactly. Yeah, you can actually at this point. That's what I was just going to show you. Bring your thread all the way to the back, and then let it hang down just about where the bend of the hook is again. And then flip it upside down. And then just take your glue, and just in this case here, I'm just going to use a toothpick just to get it a little bit more exact where I want it only. And I'm just going to put the super glue just underneath the booby eyes, just kind of work it in so it's going to lock that in. And again, put it down the actual thread too, so it kind of makes a real hard base for that to stay on. And again, if you're using super glue, if you want to stay married, try to find a tray or something so you don't put that on the counter. Trust me, it's hard to explain to your wife why there's clumps of hard stuff all over her counter.
Do you just put it on the bottom?
Yeah, I just put it on the bottom. That's enough. It'll lock it. It'll keep it under. With all those cross weaves of doing the figure eight of the thread, it's not going to move. It'll stay on the bottom. They're very firm. So now at this point, for the tail, I'm going to use marabou. But I'm going to use the chartreuse for the underside of the tail. And again, you don't need a lot of this material, but just check through it. Make sure you find fibers. You can see like the tips here of the tail fibers here. You see how thin that is? Like it doesn't have that real webby look to it. It just doesn't look right on the body itself. So what I try to do is pick down and find some fibers closer to the base of the feather. And you can see the difference down here, hopefully on the screen there, but you can see how much more webby these are. Yeah, it looks a lot more thicker, and it also, again, through the water, I think it gives it a little bit more of a disturbance as it's being moved. So I'm just cutting it off, just taking a small little clump. That's about all you need, just enough to lay in here.
Those fibers are a lot more limp too.
Yeah, exactly. Not quite as stiff. So I'm just going to wrap this forward, and again, making sure that it goes up towards the eye, so I got a nice uniform body. The tail on this pattern shouldn't really be that long. One thing I should mention too is if you're trying to tie patterns that you see maybe on the internet or in British magazines or in books, a lot of those patterns can be made more effective by being longer. But the British, the way that they have their competition angling scene over there, they have gauges. The fly can be no longer than a certain length of the hook. The dressing can be no longer, including the tail. And even in some cases with the worlds, the thickness of it can't exceed a certain amount. So we're really bound to limitations. So a lot of the patterns that you see that are extremely effective over there, that are very popular and well published, a lot of them have come from the competition scene, but they're tied that way because that's what they're restricted to. Over here in North America, you can make this pattern longer, bigger, and it doesn't mean it's going to be less effective. So you don't have to get hung up on the fact that everything is tied in a certain way in the UK. In the case of the epoxy buzzer, that one came about for the fact that some of the competitions don't allow beads. They don't allow external weighting. So they had to get creative, and by making the thin, slick bodies, they've discovered they would sink faster. So a lot of innovations in fly tying has come out of the competition scene, maybe a bit by accident or necessity. So you don't have to get too caught up in the size being exactly to what you're seeing in some cases of the British patterns.
So I actually use a Todd Oishi. It's in size 6, 3X long to take dragonfly now.
Yeah, exactly.
It uses the large eyes as well, right? So
yeah, exactly. And you can. A lot of them, well, for example, their blob pattern, other than the color difference, is very similar when you look at it compared to some of our woolly buggers. But woolly buggers they couldn't use in their competition scene because they're too long. So what they've done in a sense is they compressed them, made them shorter. So you look at a blob, you could take some of the more natural color blobs that they have, which is basically these patterns here that you see up here, these real colorful ones at the top. They're just round balls. They almost look like eggs in a sense. But what they are in my mind is they're a version of woolly bugger that's been really compressed and shortened down, and they still do work. So again, don't be afraid to experiment with patterns ever. So I'm going to lay on top of this just a thin amount of black. It's going to give an accent to the tail. And I'm just going to do the same thing again. I'm going to wrap it on here on the body. And don't be afraid if you've got fibers going forward, just bury them with your thread coming back. And I'm going to rip this off again at the same sort of length as the tail. So when this gets wet, you can see the effect of it. It kind of blends together real nicely. And it just gives that little bit of contrast. And sometimes that's all a pattern needs is a bit of contrast to make it stand out from others. And for the body material, I'm going to use the same thing, just a fritz, UV black fritz. And again, this is going to just give it a little bit more disturbance through the water. Plus, it's going to make it a little bit more visible if I'm fishing it at greater depths. And again, a half hitch. I'm going to move the thread forward to the bobbin rest. And I'm just going to spin this hackle as carefully as I can so that it's going to flare towards the back. Again, just sort of rotating it with your finger. You can see it hopefully on there, but you can control it as it goes on by just simply rolling it and trying to make it flare towards the back rather than the front. Okay, and so I've got that on. And then I'm just going to lock it down again. You can tie boobies in all sorts of colors. There's a lot of very effective, just even a plain black or whites, chartreuse, orange, any color under the sun. If it's an effective color for trout, it'll work the combination. Just put it on for this. Now the next thing is I'm going to put a wing over the top, but in order to do that, I've got to make sure there's no fritz materials that are sticking up. So I'm going to trim everything off the back so that it's completely flat. That way it'll allow it to the overwing to kind of lay down on it. If you don't do that, they're going to make it stick up and it's going to look really odd as it goes through the water. So again, just trimming all that down on the back. And then I'm just going to grab another piece of marabou here.
What size of hook again did you start with, Todd?
This one's a 10.
And it was a 230 BL?
230 BL, yeah.
Thank you.
So this one here, I'm working up close to the eye of the hook, so I don't want to have a bunch of loose fabric or fibers at the front. So I'm going to actually take the time to trim this one so it's very blunt, very precise. And again, just double check it. If you see any ones that are sticking forward, just take the time to trim them off. And this I'm going to lay so it's sort of on top of the booby eye itself. So when I pull down, it's going to actually compress, and then I can pull it back on itself and kind of lock it down. And once I've got it locked down here, I'm going to put a half hitch back there just to make sure that it's not going to cause the eye to spin as I bring it forward. And then I'm going to bring the thread underneath the booby eyes up to the front and just give it 3 or 4 spins up here. And I'm going to put a half hitch there and then just whip finish that. And just in the case of this pattern, this is one that I like to use a lot of head cement or super glue on. And again, just tug it, lock it down, trim it off, pull the tail, just comb it, or the wing, comb it back so it's the same length as the tails. And again, pinch it off and then just snap it. Now when it's in your vise, it'll look kind of odd. It looks like it wants to stick up, but when it gets in the water wet, it really sits back real nice. And again, this is what I talked about, that it could look like a small immature dragonfly, could look in different colors, could look like a damselfly. But by just having that contrast of the color, it just makes it that much more effective. And I'm just going to finish it off underneath with a bit of super glue on the knot there. And that's just going to ensure that nothing is going to move whatsoever.